Today we are going to start the basics on animation. So you've probably done this when you were a kid. You took like a little stack of papers and you made yourself a little flip book where you would draw on each page and then kind of like flip through each animation. And so we're going to try to recreate that using Adobe Animate. So that's the application that we'll be using to create these animations. Now, rather than learning how to draw all of our characters, we're actually going to use some of the pre-drawn images that are readily available on the internet. We're actually going to dig into old video games. So back in the day, rather than drawing and redrawing each movement, what they would do is they would have these pre-drawn images of left leg in front, right leg in front, and then like store all of those onto a single little sheet that they use as kind of like a database for the images that they would display on the screen. So if you search Sprite sheet, this will come up. You can either look through images and locate one that you like, or there are actually some websites where, so this one here, Spriter's Resource, you can actually search by video game console and by specific games and try to find sprite sheets for your favorite characters. So for example, I'm going to dig into the old Super Nintendo, and under S, these are all the different games they have for the Super Nintendo. And here's a classic one right here, Street Fighter, right? So I can pick one of these characters. So for example, I can pick Ken, and then these are all of the pre-drawn images that they have for a variety of different movements and attacks. So for example, right here on the top here, right, this is him throwing a punch, right? So he says ready stance, he like gets that arm ready, extends, and then pulls it back into a ready stance. And so what they would do is the game would take this and show that, then switch to this image, switch to this image, switch to this image, switch to this image. We're going to take these sprite sheets and we're going to use those images in our own animation. So what I've done is I've downloaded my own sprite sheet. I actually took one from a Dragon Ball video game and I opened it up in Photoshop. So here it is. Okay, so I have this open in Photoshop. So I have this open in Photoshop, and what I'm going to do is I want this animation down here in the bottom where he's throwing that uppercut. I want to take this animation and I want to separate each of these individual images into its own separate file. So quickest way and most straightforward way to do that is to just take the rectangular selection tool, go ahead and highlight that first image. Actually missed a bit of his hair there. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay. Once you have that selected, you can copy and then just make a new image. Right? Photoshop will automatically detect what you had copied and creates something that is the exact same size. So just use that and we're going to paste. There you go. That's our first image. And what I'll do is I will go to export, quick export as a PNG. And once I have this window open, I can choose the name and choose a location. So I'm going to throw this on my desktop. I'm going to make a folder called Vegeta. That's the name of my character. And in here, I'm going to put in these images. I'm going to call this one number 1. I'm going to number all of these just to keep it really easy to organize. So this is the first image in my animation, my sequence. So I'm going to save that as number 1.png. Okay. And then I no longer need this. I can close this. I don't have to save it anymore. I've already exported that image. I'm ready to move on to my next one. So here we go. Move on to the next one. Highlight, or sorry, select that piece right there. So same thing. Copy, new file, use that clipboard size, paste it, and then export again. Okay. So this one I'm going to label it as 2 and save it in the same location. So you're going to go through and for each image in your animation, save each of the images as a separate file. Now I've already gone ahead and done that over here. So I've taken each of these images, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now it's time for me to bring this into Adobe Animate. When you fire up Adobe Animate for the first time, you'll probably be greeted with a screen similar to this one here. You can create a full HD animation, something that's made for Android, maybe for an iPad. What we're going to do is this one here, but we don't want it to be full HD. We don't need our animation to be that high resolution. We're just playing around with it at the moment. So in the drop-down menu, if you click this little arrow here, we'll actually switch it to just standard def. So we'll go ahead and click that. So it'll create a new animation with a resolution of 640 pixels wide, 480 pixels tall. And this section right here is called the stage. The portion that has this white box is going to be what's visible. So you can imagine this is what would appear on your computer monitor or on your television. Anything outside of that will be cut off and you won't be able to see it. On the right side, this is a panel here called Properties. So very similar to Photoshop, they have a number of different panels that you can cycle between by clicking on these tabs. The Properties one is the one you'll mostly be using. And so right now, the Properties is for this entire document. I have the resolution, like I mentioned before, and I have the stage color. So this is like the default background color for your animation. Right now it's set to white. You can change it to whatever you want. I'm just going to leave it as white for now. On the left, you'll see a number of tools. So just like in Photoshop, you'll see some familiar ones, such as the paintbrush, the pencil. Okay, you can also draw shapes. And one of the tools that you'll be getting a lot of use out of is this one here. This is the selection tool. So you can actually click on individual objects and remove them, or you can highlight over a bunch of them by drawing a box, and then that selects those pieces for you to move, resize, or delete. On the bottom is the timeline. So I'm actually going to extend this a little bit so we have a little bit more space. This timeline shows your animation's timeline, and each of these little boxes here represent a frame. So just like you had your little flip book and then you would flip through each page, each of these frames would be one page. So each one represents a frame. Now, the speed of our animation is set to 30 frames per second, which means it will take 1 full second to play 30 frames. That means you're flipping through 30 pages in 1 second. Now, right now we have this one frame here. You'll notice that it's a little bit different color than the rest, and it has that little circle there. That indicates that it's a key frame. Keyframes are used to indicate when something is going to change. So on this keyframe, I'm actually going to open up my folder with all my images. I'm going to grab this first image here, and I'm going to drag it onto the stage. And we're going to plunk it roughly in the middle. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit lower. I like it right there. So you'll see now that the little circle turned black, indicating that you have something on the stage on this keyframe. So this keyframe has something going on. It's got this picture showing. All right, let's go ahead and make a new keyframe. So I'm going to click on the second frame here. I'm going to right click, or on a Mac, if you don't have two mouse buttons, you can press Control click. But I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to choose Insert a Blank Keyframe. So just like before, you can see here that we have this new frame with a little circle to indicate that it's a keyframe, and it's blank, then that's why the circle is not filled in. So on this keyframe, with this frame selected, I'm going to open up my folder again and drag in my second image. And now comes the tricky part of trying to line up the new image with the previous image. So this one, I moved it down there. So I'm going to try to do my best to kind of move it in that location. You could go back and forth and move it around until it lines up nicely, but there's a better way of doing this. There's an option down here called onion skin. So if you click on this and activate onion skin, what it'll do is on this timeline, you'll see that there's a blue and green bar. Basically, it will show your current frame, the image on your current frame, as well as the image from the previous frame in blue and the future frame in green. So now that I can see where the previous image was, it's a lot easier for me to line this up with the old one. So I'm going to pop it right there. I'm going to do this again. Insert a blank keyframe, and then bring in my third image. There we go. And I can see where the previous images are. It's actually showing both the image from frame 1 and frame 2. They're kind of overlapping. It's getting a little messy. So what I'll do is I'm going to trim the amount of onion skinning that it's going to do. I only need to see one frame behind me. So there we go. I'm going to take that and use that to line up my character. Okay. So you want to repeat this process and with all of your images until you get them all onto their own keyframe. And then you should end up with something that looks like this, where each frame has the corresponding image, and you've gotten them all on there lined up nicely. You can now test this out by hitting the play button here. This is just a preview of what you have. So there we go. Whoa. That's way too fast. So what we can do here is we need to make some adjustments. This uppercut is happening way too fast. It looks inhuman. We don't want that. We want to slow it down a little bit. There's a couple things you can do. You can either adjust the frames per second, or you can go in here and essentially spend more time on each keyframe. So this image right here, instead of only spending one frame on it and then switching right away, let's spend a little bit more time here. So select a keyframe, right click, and then go to Insert Frame. Not a keyframe, just a regular frame. You'll see that there's a shortcut of F5, so you can press that on your keyboard as well. So F5, F5 again. I'm going to add 2 frames. And so what happens here is this particular keyframe with this image on it is going to stay on screen for 1, 2, 3 frames. And I'm going to do this for each of my keyframes. I'm going to add a couple of frames just to make each keyframe last a little bit longer before we switch off to the next one. Okay, so what I've done here is I've essentially tripled the amount of frames required to play this animation. And so now when I play it, it's a little bit slower, but still manageable, and it looks a lot better. Just don't go overboard with adding frames. Yes, it slows things down, but if you slow it down to the point where the human eye can start picking up on the individual images and they're not flowing together well, it looks very stuttery, and you don't want that. So be careful with how much frame removal you're doing. All right, That's your first assignment. You're going to create your first animation by taking a sprite sheet, chopping everything up into individual images, then using Adobe Animate, create a keyframe for each image, and then you can slow things down by inserting some frames to extend how long each keyframe is sitting on screen for. If you want to test out the whole thing and see what it looks like as a rendered image, you can go up to Control and then hit Test. Here's what the animation looks like. Once you're done, save this as #1 sprite animation, and then we're all done.